About another minute.
Yes, I'm thinking. We're gonna shut the door. Shut the door.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Welcome to the public participation session for the Ulster County Long Range Transportation Plan for year 2045. This is being done by the Ulster County Transportation Council, and a couple of things we want to do relative to setting up for today. If you have a question, please use the question and answer box that's part of the meeting. To ask that question, you can also raise your hand. We're going to be doing a short presentation today, and that will be followed by live question and answers. You may also submit questions and comments on the transportation plan up until August 31st of this year. And we'll go over some of the timeframes for the adoption of the plan as we go through the presentation. I'd like to introduce some of the staff that's involved in the preparation of the plan and will be involved in today's preparation. Brian Slack is with us here today. Brian is the Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council, and he is housed in the Ulster County Planning Department's offices. We also have Dave Stotts. David is a Senior Transportation Planner with the Transportation Council. And finally, we have Robert Leibowitz, who is a Principal Planner, and Robert's doing some of the technical work for us today on the Zoom meeting. So let me just tell you a little bit about what the Ulster County Transportation Council is. The Transportation Council was formed in 2003, and it was a result of the 2000 census where the city of Kingston and the areas around it became a urbanized area with more than 50,000 people in population. Since that time in 2010, we've expanded that planning area to include southern Ulster County. And in addition, we now include the counties of Dutchess and Orange County into something called a transportation management area. And the three entities in those counties, both the Orange County Transportation Council, the Poughkeepsie Transportation Council, as well as the Ulster County Transportation Council, conduct a regional planning operation as well as the individual operations within each county. The Transportation Council has a decision-making body. That is the policy committee. That policy committee essentially is comprised of all the chief elected officials within Ulster County. In addition, there is a technical committee that assists the policy committee in making decisions. And finally, the chairman of the Transportation Council is the county executive, Patrick K. Ryan. So today we're going to be discussing a long-range transportation plan, and it helps if everyone understands what a long-range transportation plan is. First of all, it's a federally required document that essentially deals with the strategy and capital improvement programs that are going to be used to decide how transportation areas of transportation infrastructure are funded. In addition, it provides the goals and policy objectives for the Transportation Council in terms of its investment in plans and studies. The plan is updated every 5 years, and you're seeing the cover of the last update, which was Plan 2040.
I'm going to just provide everyone with a few housekeeping issues and important dates to be aware of. Right now, if you go on the UCTC website and navigate to the project website, which is the page URLs at the bottom, you can then find the draft year 2045 long range plan sections are all available for download. We will have a second revision made available by Monday of next week, and they will include some minor updates and additions, a few additional maps that we have yet to get to. And we will put a little note next to each section if the section has been updated for your information. And we'll try to compile it into one PDF for download as well. Some important dates: the year 2045 transportation plan needs to be approved no later than September 30th, 2020. And as of right now, the UCTC Policy Committee is scheduled to meet, review, and hopefully approve this document at the meeting on September 22nd. As Dennis mentioned, the deadline for comments is August 31st, and those can be submitted to me in writing, and all of our contact information will be provided at the conclusion of this presentation.
Thank you, Brian. So what is the purpose of the long-range transportation plan, and how does it operate? One of the things that the plan does, it establishes a community vision, and the plan does have its own vision statement. We won't get into it today, but there is a vision statement within the plan itself. It shows essentially how those investments can be achieved, and it starts by looking at the needs associated with the transportation system across all modes, and then finally looking at the alternatives to those investments, some of the constraints that are imposed upon us, and begins to set through goal statements and strategies the priorities for those investments and the priorities for the transportation system itself. Thank you. I'll continue if you don't mind. Some of the important considerations with respect to a transportation, the long-range transportation plan is, in point of fact, it is long-range. This is a 25-year plan, and only a portion of the recommendations will be accomplished during the next 5 years. It is updated every 5 years. And one of the things that we have to do with respect to this long-range transportation plan is make sure that it's fiscally constrained. That means that effectively, when we look at the analysis of the monies that we believe that are available to us, that it matches the projects that are included in the plan, and looking at how that plays out moving forward relative to those dollar amounts, and the projection for those dollar amounts gets a little bit tricky. So the last thing that the plan does, and this plan does, is it's smart. What does that mean is that we've used an acronym SMART to mean that the plan is specific, it contains specific recommendations, it's measurable, it has specific actions, it's realistic, and in point of fact, it's time-bound.
Public participation is a critical component of the long-range transportation planning process. For this iteration, we elected to hire Susan Blickstein of New Paltz. Susan's a planner and a professor in the Hudson Valley. And they began the public outreach process in July. We were forced to have a relatively condensed calendar and schedule for public outreach due to the COVID-19 crisis. However, we were able to do some very valuable meetings so far. We began in July with 4 stakeholder focus group meetings with a small collection of local leaders and representatives from a variety of focus areas and backgrounds. And then we opened up a public survey tool, which was available for roughly 3 to 4 weeks in both English and Spanish. And we had over 350 responses, 365 responses, which was excellent for a UCTC survey. The purpose of the survey was largely to validate, review, and hopefully try to get some sense of whether the goals and vision statement were in line with the public sentiment. And we did get some pretty strong approval of those goals and the vision statement based on the responses that we heard. And we also had a general comment section, an open-ended question, and some of the main themes that came through that were the importance of public transit and mobility and connectivity, particularly with regard to the trail system and the trail network, and also trying to have more mobility options for people so that they don't necessarily need to rely on a car in order to get where they're going. So
when you begin with the transportation plan, how do you start and where do you make the decisions in terms of the data that you need to begin to develop strategies? So the map you're looking at essentially provides a background for how we made those decisions. It shows the places where people work, where they go to school, where they shop, and where they receive health care. No surprises here relative to what we think we know, and that is that the activity centers of Kingston, Highland, New Paltz, Saugerties, and Ellenville show up, as do the corridors in the valleys, which are in the Route 209 corridor, the Route 32 corridor, and the Route 9W corridor. And then up into the mountains, you'll see the corridors associated with the Route 28 corridor. So when we look at that, we begin then to go back and say, how does that relate to the critical transportation infrastructure that we already have? So what this map shows you is essentially those critical corridors as it relates to where we were, as we just talked about, with respect to jobs and travel patterns. And it does show that the critical corridors match up very well with respect to where we have the most transportation need and the most transportation activity. So when we look 25 and 40 and 25 years ahead to the 2045, we have to ask the question, how do we grow and where do we grow? And so what this map does, it places on the existing footprint of those activity areas the most likely areas where the communities will grow. These are called priority growth areas. They were done in response to the comprehensive planning effort that the county planning department undertook for Ulster County. And it maps out the most likely areas where public infrastructure either exists or can be expanded within the county as it relates to those activity areas. And those are the pink areas that you see on the map. The green areas that you see on the map are a look at the major projects that the county has been involved in and been reviewing for the last 5 years. So priority growth areas, the takeaway is they follow critical corridors. They include employment centers. They are also population centers, and they're a place where there has been an investment in public infrastructure. So the other thing that influences the decision-making with respect to priorities as it relates to transportation systems as we look forward is what do we think is going to happen with respect to growth, particularly as it relates to population. And what you can see here is that we're pretty sure that the population growth will be gradual. We also think that the population will generally be older. And for the most part, the population will grow in the southern Ulster County, the Kingston area, and up in the Saugerties area, which reflects the commutation patterns associated with the workforce in the county. And once we get to those areas of what we believe are important, and it becomes much more difficult when we look beyond 5 to 10 years in terms of what the actual growth will be. And when you look at these lines that are on the maps, that are on this graph, it gives you a sense of how divergent the various anticipated growth rates are. We've chosen a modest growth in terms of population change for the baseline for this plan.
Right now, I'm going to take a few moments to walk you through some of the main themes and sections of the long-range transportation plan. It's a roughly 180-page report. And there's a lot of detailed information that I think can be very valuable for your organizations and just for your knowledge. It's important to remember that the long-range transportation plan is a multimodal surface transportation effort. So we're looking at not just transit, but also cars, buses, bikes, and also pedestrian travel as well. All different types of surface transportation modes for traveling throughout Ulster County. So when we think about how do we travel, one of the main areas that we like to focus on is the commute to work, because the commute to work is in large part a major proportion of the vehicles traveled on an annual basis throughout the United States and certainly in Ulster County. So when we look at that data, we know that 77% of commuters traveling to work are driving alone in a single occupancy vehicle, which is obviously going to have a major impact on the traffic volumes that we see on our highways in the mornings and in the evening. The other mode share, as we call it, or mode split, is shown in the chart as well. This data is from 2018, and it's very much in line with the previous year's data going back to 2013 and 2010. And then we ask ourselves, well, where do we work? This information was compiled by David Stoss at our office. We know that over 43,000 people live in Ulster County, but they work outside of Ulster County, so they need to travel to those jobs outside of the county. The map to the right of your screen illustrates that over 10,000 of those individuals travel daily to the New York metropolitan area for their employment. They may be traveling by Trailways bus, by Metro North, or by auto, or maybe hopefully in a carpool. But we know that every day a significant amount of people are traveling outside of the county to seek employment.
So Brian, before you go on, if I may, this has been a continuing trend where we see an increase in the labor force essentially working outside of Ulster County. If you went back and look at the 2000 census, right on straight through to where we are today with the American Community Survey work, you'll see a continuing increase of employment outside of Ulster County. We do not know yet what's going to happen with respect to that continuing increase of commutation, given what is currently occurring with respect to COVID-19. The remote work process and the remote work ability to essentially to be embraced by corporations and employers may significantly change how people go to work outside of Ulster County.
Thank you. We also want to take a look at the condition of existing infrastructure. And when we do that, we very quickly paint a picture of aging infrastructure in Ulster County. This is just one example of the types of data that we look at. This is a snapshot of bridge conditions in Ulster County. The map to the right shows all bridges as well as their rated condition as indicated by the New York State Department of Transportation. And then the chart to the left shows the share of bridges by owner and the share which are structurally deficient. Ulster County is the biggest bridge owner in the county, Ulster County DPW that is. And they own 154 bridges. And as part of the burden of ownership, they also have a disproportionate number of bridges that are structurally deficient. This is going to be a major consideration into the future when we think about how we're going to maintain the existing system to keep it opening, connected and functioning into the future. Whenever we do, as a Transportation Council, either a plan or propose a construction project, there is always one important fundamental question for everything we do. And that question is, will it make transportation safer for the traveling public? Everything we do has that question underlying it. We've undertaken a pretty significant effort to detail and inventory crash history in Ulster County. In years past, we've always included crash data in our long-range transportation plans, but this is a great opportunity for the first time to really delve down deep into that data and give ourselves a good analysis of crash history, crash type, and where exactly those different types of crashes are occurring on the Ulster County highway system. The charts in front of us give a quick depiction of what those trends look like over time, and also what types of crashes are occurring on our highways. We also take a look at freight. Freight is an important component as well. We know in Ulster County, we're not exactly a major generator of freight. There isn't a great deal of manufacturing, at least not comparatively when we look at our counties to the south of us, particularly in the metro area. But a great deal of freight does pass through the county, and that also includes local deliveries when we're getting our deliveries from various online retailers. That's a consideration as well within this plan, and how our communities are able to accommodate. Also, the West Shore Railroad passes through Ulster County. It's another major consideration as to how that railroad impacts our communities, particularly at the intersections of the local roadway system with the CSX West Shore Railroad. And we will be including the safety analysis of those intersections in the draft plan as well. Climate change is another important component. This is a relatively new analysis that we're including in this year's plan. While we've talked about climate change in the past, we've never really had access to the types of data that we do today. We know that transportation is one of the main sources of greenhouse gases, not only in the United States, but in New York State as well, and also in Ulster County. In New York State, transportation, surface transportation accounts for 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. We're able to estimate annual greenhouse gas emissions from transportation within Ulster County, and that's what the chart to the right shows. The estimation is based on vehicle miles traveled and the mix of vehicles on the road. So the good news is that emissions have been declining in the past several years. On the other hand, though, the emissions are tied directly to vehicle miles traveled. So if we see an increase in those single occupancy trips and people driving more in Ulster County, we would very likely see an increase in emissions unless we change the type of vehicles that are on the road to more hybrids or electric vehicles. Then we could see a continual drop in emissions. And resiliency is another very important theme and factor within the 2045 plan. Depicted to the left is a roadway up, I believe, in Frost Valley in Ulster County that was impacted after Hurricane Irene. When we think about transportation resiliency, it refers to the transportation infrastructure's ability to withstand these types of historic, repetitive natural disasters. And as the major rain events that occur have indicated, a lot of our older infrastructure was not designed to withstand the types of rainfall events that we're expected to receive and in greater frequency going into the future. So after we consider all of these various data points, all the public input, and also factor in the state and federal guidance that we use to develop the long-range transportation plan, we're able to take the information and generate goals. And goals lead to objectives and help us to really wrap our arms around all the various issues that we need to consider in the long-range plan. We have 8 goals in this plan that everything is organized under, and I'm going to run through them relatively quickly. They're listed in no order of priority. The first goal is system preservation, which refers to investing in the infrastructure that we have versus building new. This is a system preservation plan, and as we'll provide more information on later on regarding funding. Economic vitality, we want to make sure that our transportation system supports economic vitality throughout the county and the region. Safety, as I mentioned, is a very important consideration, that all of our actions should improve the safety of all users of the transportation system. Sustainability, ensuring that transportation system users have a secure environment and that the system provides residents with adequate service in the context of severe weather events. Mobility and reliability, which refers primarily to efficient and reliable travel, and also having options to choose from and able to get around the county. Accessibility and connectivity, create and maintain a well-connected system that provides access for people and goods traveling by all modes. The environment, contribute to making Ulster County a sustainable place by protecting and enhancing the natural and built environment, and making sure that new transportation projects do not have a negative impact on the environment. And finally, equity, making sure that we develop strategies that seek to mitigate negative effects related to the system on that might impact the most vulnerable members of the community, such as low-income residents, minorities, children, people with disabilities, and older adults. Equity is a new goal that has been added to the 2045 plan. The other 7 goals were developed back in the previous iteration. Under each goal is a performance measure or several performance measures, because you cannot manage what you can't measure. Performance management is a new requirement that has been dictated by the federal government, that MPOs must now include a system performance plan. But we've been using performance measures, as have many MPOs, for many years now. So we're able to track performance under each goal using the metrics that we've discussed previously and some other data points that are established by the Transportation Council.
So why do we do goals? The simple answer is that goals allow us to essentially develop strategies, and from strategies we can do projects, and those projects take a couple of different forms. One is the actual construction of transportation infrastructure, and the other one is actually to move towards a plan, more precise plan for the various goals to make them more susceptible to essentially being turned into projects. So goals turn into projects for both the near term and for the long term.
Another major component, if not the most important component, of the long-range transportation plan is the financial plan. The donut chart shown here indicates all the federal transportation funds that are currently programmed for expenditure within the next 5 years on our transportation improvement program. So that includes $28.1 million for funding through the Federal Transit Administration, and that funding will go toward UCAT services, and also a portion can go to Adirondack Trailways, and also for the maintenance of our park and ride facilities and other transit-related types of expenditures. And on the federal highway side, we have $64 million that have been programmed for various surface transportation projects, such as roads, bridges, and trails within Ulster County. We utilize the existing 5-year program to then forecast how much money might be available to us going out to 2045. It really is a best guess to the best of our ability. But we do have several factors that are considered when we develop that forecast. The major consideration is that this plan assumes flat federal funding through the life of the plan. We should not expect to receive additional dollars beyond what we are currently receiving on a 5-year basis in Ulster County. We are able to provide for, take into account inflation factors as we project outward, but otherwise, this is a flat funded long-range transportation plan. Some very broad conclusions before we can open it up to Q&A. At the very end of the long-range plan is section 9, the plan of projects. We have short-term plans, which include those that are currently short-term projects, which are currently programmed on the tip, as I had mentioned. But then we also have some potential long-range projects that are included. Overall, some of the major considerations is that this is a preservation-first long-range transportation plan. The primary focus is to extend the useful life of the facilities that we have and maintain the system that we have. That's a major consideration here. Resiliency going forward will be a major driving force behind our investment decisions. Local and county bridges, as one of our previous slides showed, is a serious concern, and it's something that we're going to really be focusing on out of sheer need in the future, making sure we secure local funds that when we build bridges, that we're building them to be resilient and can withstand and last for a minimum of 50 years. Safety as well. Safety projects are really important to UCTC and to the public. And any time that we can program a new project is going to have a known improvement to the level of safety on the highway is a major consideration and benefit, and it's something that is always on our minds. And finally, mobility. We've heard repeatedly through surveys, through previous planning projects, and through this process that the transit system is vital, it's used, it's loved by many residents, and they want more of it. And so to the extent that we can continue to plan for and invest in our local and regional transit system, we're going to. And we're going to look for better ways to purchase new rolling stock and, if possible, plan for improved operations into the future.
So remember we talked about turning goals into strategies and policies and turning goals into projects. We wanted to give you an example in closing out how effective the Transportation Council has been in terms of turning its plans that were requested by municipalities and undertaken by the Transportation Council into projects. And we've given you a smattering of the projects we've done. I can tell you that there are significantly more than this, but understand that some of our plans with respect to our non-motorized transportation plan have led directly to essentially the construction of trails. Some of them involving critical corridors have led to corridor construction, such as Broadway. Others, in terms of major intersections for safety improvements, have also led to construction, in one of those examples is the city of Kingston. And then finally, those things which relate to the environment and others are also included in that list of projects. I would encourage you to essentially visit the County Transportation Council's project page and look at those plans. We are also engaged in several other additional plans, which we hope will set communities up for additional projects in the future.
So that concludes our presentation. In just a minute, we'll start to open the floor up for questions and letting people in. Again, if you have a comment or a question, please raise your hand and we'll start to get to you. Just some final housekeeping issues. Of course, the long range plan website, if you've made it to the Zoom webinar, you know where the website is. We will be accepting comments through August 31st. They can be sent to the email address shown on the screen. All comments will be included in an appendix to the plan. If you prefer that your comment be anonymous, that's fine. Just indicate as much to us when you submit your comment. Again, the important dates, the next step in the approval process, this document will need to be reviewed and approved by the UCTC Technical Committee, which meets on the 25th of August. And then finally, the Policy Committee, which gives final approval, and we'll review it on September 22nd. If you want to receive notification regarding any of our meetings, please add your name to the UCTC mailing list. We do not do many emails blasts, but we do vital ones, and you can customize the types of emails that you receive. So that's it for the presentation. Let me see, we have some comments that have been submitted. Impact of federal and New York State budget constraints due to COVID-19. Dennis, do you want to comment on what the potential funding constraints might be going forward?
Well, the plan is primarily looking at the use of federal dollars. So from a state perspective, the impacts on the plan are not, from the plan's perspective and the state using state dollars, they're not that great. But what I would say is that it's increasingly seen that the way to get transportation projects completed and on the books is to use a variety of funding sources. Those include NYSERDA funding sources, DEC funding sources, and state funding sources. And to that extent, we would expect that there would be a significant impact on those particular funding sources moving forward, whether it's the Bridge New York program, the Pave New York program, other programs with respect to that as well. So that has to do with, on the federal, that has to do with the state funding. On the federal side, we're currently in the process of looking at a federal bill to reauthorize the transportation funding. And we do not know what that bill is currently under consideration. We do not know what the outcome of that bill is. There's been a general recognition at the congressional level of the need to invest in infrastructure. Importantly, from our perspective, that investment in infrastructure is not only on the critical corridors or those on the federal aid system, but if you can remember that map that got shown to you with respect to the bridges that were deficient, Ulster County has a number of deficient bridges, a majority of deficient bridges that are what they call off-system. They're not in the federal aid system. And so we're actively engaged in trying to make sure that any transportation bill recognizes the need for off-system bridge infrastructure funding.
Thanks, Dennis. Next question I see is from Emily. How will this plan encourage behavior change from automobile use to active transportation, like walking and biking? As we know, walking and biking are better for the environment, ease traffic congestion, and support healthy lifestyles. Good question, Emily. The long-range plan is essentially the guiding star for all the work that the UCTC will be doing for at least the next 5 years until the next update of the document. So all of our plans and projects need to be in accordance with the long-range plan. As we mentioned, under the goals, connectivity is one of the primary goals of this plan. So when we do planning projects that encourage developing rail trail corridors into multimodal bike and pedestrian corridors, that I believe is encouraging active transportation, walking and biking. And whenever we can program projects that are going to provide for improved trail surfaces or new sidewalks within cities, or something like the Building a Better Broadway project, that's going to, we would hope, increase connectivity as well. So if we can improve connectivity with the system, and also I think that will also lead to improved mobility and can improve active transportation in communities.
So if I just want to continue
Sure.
a little bit on that. So if you look at the investment priorities within the goal statements, investment in corridor improvements relative to safety, also encourage walking and bicycling, investment in the transit system in all its forms, and that does not just mean public transit systems, but also the private commuter carriers, as well as some of the disruptors which are envisioned in this plan, particularly those that relate to some of the Uber and Lyft issues which have come up as to whether or not they've been permitted in various communities and how they get licensed and how they move forward, and how we can take advantage of that model in terms of providing additional flexibility for transit. And then finally, I think the investment in the non-motorized transportation system that Brian talked about, and the investment of safety in the pedestrian system is also important. Last but not least is the Transportation Council participates in the review of individual projects. And one of the things that we do in those individual projects is continue to look at the private sector making the investment from the road to the building, and from across their frontages in terms of sidewalks and pedestrian access.
Any other questions from attendees today? As I mentioned, I believe we mentioned, this is the third of 4 virtual public meetings that we've been hosting regarding the long-range transportation plan. The final virtual meeting is this evening at 7 p.m. and that will also involve Spanish translation. So, and after that, we'll go into document revision. We have another question. How are you incorporating the new equity goal into the plan and development of priorities and projects? Good question, Emily. One of the metrics that we're including under the equity goal, and this, of course, because it's a new goal, it is in development, but we want to use the outreach process as a metric for how we are achieving equity in transportation planning. So let me explain. Whenever we do a planning project, if it's known to touch on or encompass an environmental justice area, that is a location that might have an elevated population of people who have English as a second language, of minorities, of low income, people with disabilities. All of those locations have been mapped and are included in detailed maps in the long range plan. So when we do a planning project that might impact one of those neighborhoods, we're going to develop a specific public participation plan to improve outreach and participation within that specific community. That's our initial thought on how we measure our effectiveness of equity in transportation planning. It really is, from our perspective, about participation, about having the opportunity to participate too. It's always been a challenge of the Transportation Council to get people to show up, turn out, and participate in the planning process. So that is where I believe our efforts will be focused under that goal.
So, if I may, I think one of the simplest ways to explain it is that equity becomes inclusive within the decision-making process, whether it be on a public participation basis, whether it be relative to the plans that we do, or how we program and make decisions with respect to transportation investments. Those projects are looked at in two ways. One is on the mitigation for any impact associated with the project, and two is the expanding the opportunities associated with transportation investment, whether it be in trail systems, pedestrian systems, transit systems, et cetera.
Great. And Judith asked if she could get credit for this attending session, training credit. Of course you can. We'll provide whatever certification confirmation that you might require, but ultimately the decision lies with your local board, whether this will count, and I believe it will, or should. Kevin asks, is climate change, sea level rise, migration of population into the UCTC region incorporated into the projected population growth trends? Boy, that's a tough one. Dennis?
I'm not sure. I mean, let me just answer it this way. From our perspective, we do not see the influence of sea level rise in terms of population change associated with that. We would see differences associated with, and I'm not sure that the Global Insights and other folks that are doing the population projections are looking at that particular metric and saying that's going to cause growth up into the Hudson Valley from the metropolitan areas, if that's what you're talking about. I'm a little. I think I understand the question, but I guess the demographics are pretty clear in terms of what's going to happen. I think the more important factor relative to climate change with respect to population change is the demographic change and things associated with natural disasters that are, or other disasters that occur, such as the recent pandemic, which may force a reallocation of a rethink of where people want to live. I would say that the market forces do affect how people live. We've seen, for example, from 2007 through 2019, a market force which essentially people did not want to live by themselves on large lots. And the thought was that we had too many single family houses and not enough apartment buildings, and the growth was going to take place in urbanized areas. The pandemic may have changed that dynamic significantly in terms of where the current trends seem to be in terms of where people would like to live, which is not necessarily in highly urbanized areas and in more diffuse situations where they can avoid crowds and avoid the necessary and keep that necessary social distancing. I don't know whether that sort of addresses your question, but we're not seeing a major shift in population on the basis of climate change in terms of our projections. Is that the simplest way to,
Right.
to answer it?
It's something of a known unknown, I would consider it as, especially out beyond 5-10 years. You're welcome, Kevin. Thank you. Any other questions at this point? It doesn't look like we have any open questions. No hands raised. So again, thank you for attending. We'll stay on for just another minute or so if you think of anything else.
The comments are due.
Comments on the draft document are due on the 31st. This has been a really condensed schedule for us due to the COVID pandemic, and we're very pleased to be getting it out here during the month of August. We've been focused primarily on the content of this document as we prepare the material, and we will be developing a different version later on in the year that will have improved graphics, but the content will remain the same. So please get us your comments by the 31st. And otherwise, I think that's a wrap. Thank you all for attending.